When I was approached by Georgia to do this, she asked me to talk about some of the work I had done. And so I'm taking note of Julian's comments and I'm going to share my knowledge. I'm not saying it's the answer to your problems, but I think you will find that some of the tools that I use and some of the examples I give may be of value to you. I started revegetation in salt country when I was 9. I was in an orphanage called Werribee, some of you might remember, and the man in charge was an agronomist and a geneticist. And he taught me, never mind the trees, plant the shrubs that eat salt. And my first job as a child in the orphanage was picking ruby saltbush seeds out of dirt to plant them on. When I came here to high school with a scholarship, I planted trees on the old Tamman Road, the old York Tamman Road. And I'm happy to say some of those trees are still growing. Because back in those days, remember, we used to have Arbor Day. We used to go out every year and plant trees where kids could look after them. Our families were involved. Kids' family, everyone was involved in tree planting. But I'm not going to babble on about me, just enough to tell you that my work over the many, many years has been with industry. Industry, mostly mining, mostly oil fields. That's why Chevron is my major client. And this year Chevron is spending something like $100 billion in Western Australia. That's right, $100 billion in Western Australia. None of it in agriculture, none of it in aquaculture, but a lot of it in education, a lot of it in Indigenous affairs, a lot of it in community affairs. Wherever they work, they involve the communities. That is part of my job. But my main job is to rehabilitate the lands that have been damaged, destroyed, or affected by the operations of my client. Now, my client ranges from Chevron, an oil company, BHP, a mining company, Ready-Mix, a quarrying company, the West Australian government, the federal government, and overseas. I've also worked there. So I've got a fair bit of experience which may be of use. Now, my opening picture, have I got a bumper here? Yes, I have. There it is. All this technology blows me away. I'm afraid I'm a dinosaur. I don't like this stuff, but never mind. So where are we at? My opening slide, I put agricultural biodiversity. That picture was given to me. It was used internationally as an example of the magnificent cropping in the Wheatbelt of Western Australia. And they asked me to promote it when I went overseas. And I said, what the hell would I promote that for? All that is saying is in 4 years' time, that country is going to be derelict unless you treat it with so much fertiliser, you're going to kill everything in the country. At the moment, there is no sign of any native vegetation except right over on the far hill. That's a rock outcrop. They couldn't be cultivated. Now, for 4 years, that was magnificent production. The man who did it got a knighthood. But now it's a sand patch. Now it's just blowing sand, and the children and grandchildren of that man are desperately trying to plant trees and recover some of this country to put roots down, to pull the salt down so they can go back to cropping. Okay, let's see if we can get this thing working. Yeah, there it is. I'll put the sky back in. That's not bush in the distance, that's cloud cover. Okay, you all know the problems. This one is on a farm at Coolin, and it just shows the impact of stocking on the wheat paddock, and you can see here where the stock have grazed, the sheep and cattle have grazed the plants. These are the same plants, but you can see where they've grazed them off as far as they can reach, and you all are familiar with the graze line. Now what that means, as you all know, at least you should know, is that now the ground underneath there has no litter and is not protected from the sun. And so when our hot summers come, the tree cooks and the trees die. And time again you can see people who have deliberately left shade belts in their paddocks or shade lines along the fence lines for practical and pragmatic reasons, find their trees are dying. They're either ringbarked by the stock, but mostly because they're grazed out underneath. So as a result, one of my proposals, one of my plans, one of my successful operations was to say to my farm client, forget straight line fencing, follow the contours of the land, run your fences on the contour and double bank with a chain on each side of your fence line with a bush strip. And any creek lines, double bank. That's an example from the air of it, and that particular crop is on the peninsula in South Australia, the Eyre Peninsula, and it has continued the same productive rate regardless of the weather situation. The neighbours can pull in a better crop one year, but for the next 5 years on the Eyre Peninsula, they get lower crops. But Reg pulls in crops year after year after year, exactly the same. He knows where he's at. He's got a future. This is more like the landscape that we have, unfortunately. This is not far from here. I'm not going to mention any names in case you're in the audience. But you can see there's very little original vegetation left. Now, the second thing that Georgia said to me was that she would like me to talk about, can we manage our natural resources? Can we bring back what was here? And the answer is no, we can't. I don't care how green you are, I don't care how hairy your armpits are, you cannot bring back what has gone because it is extinct. The animals that lived here in the Wheatbelt, because of that, those small patches of bushland, whoops, come back here. Press too many buttons at once. Sorry, wrong way. Come back. Now you're getting a preview of what I'm going to talk about. Yeah, one more. That's it. These small patches of bush will hold a few birds. They might hold a roo or two, but they will hold the rabbits and the cats, the foxes and the rats and the mice. They will hold the vermin, and the vermin will outstrip the native animals all the time. When I was a young man here, I lived on rabbits. My scholarship wasn't enough to carry me through, so I used to trap rabbits. I lived in Clackline and I used to ride in every day, and I used to sell rabbits to Rodiger, who I notice is still here, and to the boarding houses for my schoolmates, and then sell the skins to Dalgety. But the rabbits have taken over, despite Mixie and despite calicivirus. The rabbits, the foxes, the cats have taken over. Now the birds will persist for a while, but even they will start to thin down. This is one of my developed tools. This is a wing plough with a vengeance. This is used to break up 1 metre deep salt pan and salt layers and acid soils and allow drainage through the soil. We plant on the furrows. It goes down for a full metre. It takes big machinery to pull it, ploughs on the contour, and was designed for Alcoa for reparation in their land. This is doesn't look much, well, yeah, not much of a farm, is it? Except it's not a farm at all. It's a quarry. This quarry was owned by this particular family who were forward-thinking. And they were forward-thinking enough to say, hey, Harry, come and help us design what we're going to do. Now, out of that quarry site, we quarried rock, we quarried gravel, we quarried sand, and later we quarried water. But we didn't open it in one great big bag. We opened slot quarrying, took the topsoil off, and moved it off to one side. And then we used that pit as a waste pit, a non-toxic waste pit, and got paid for it. And so we covered it with the scalps and the waste material from the quarry, and we moved the quarry right through. That is now a fully productive farm. It's been a waste pit, and there's opportunities on that. I missed all of Julian's speech, but one thing he didn't mention was waste production. The amount of waste that is produced and the need to dispose of it. And the problem is that our waste is toxic. He did mention toxic waste going to rivers, but the toxic waste is lethal for our areas, and already you've probably heard the ruckus in your area about Perth wanting to dispose of its waste products around 2J and places like that, because there's nowhere left around Perth to do it, and it's not safe. Groundwater is in the wrong levels. Salt is a very difficult issue, and here is a demonstration in the Pilbara of a salt clay pan which has been restored. Now, it's not restored to the point where I'm satisfied with it, but what I have demonstrated is that you can regenerate vegetation even on the most desolate salt pan. And that's where your technology has to come in. You need your biologists, you need your botanists to go out and locate salt-tolerant plants. These are all salt-tolerant plants. That is a straight clay pan. It's been deep ripped, as I showed you, with the wing plough, and furrowed around, and then that stops the wind blow, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. So salt we can do. Salt is so easy to handle when you know how, that you can actually dredge sea salt from the bottom of the ocean and build suburbs. This is a suburb of Southport in Queensland. You can see the wealth down here, all the high-rise buildings. Well, I love those people. They don't produce a bloody thing. But here we dredge this channel out and this channel out, and we use the soil to build an artificial island, and then planted salt-tolerant plants. Once they got going, or we used it as a rubbish dump too, and once they got going, we then brought other things in, and now that is a thriving community of some 50,000 people. So, yeah, I can handle salt problems. One of the technological tools I use is cloning. Oh, God. People get excited when you say cloning. Don't. Cloning is a natural phenomenon. Cloning is exactly the same as a plant suckering, a plant putting out a piece of itself, putting its roots down, same as taking a cutting off a geranium or a rose. This is cloning for a much more particular reason. This is a totally salt-tolerant eucalypt. It grows in salt water in the mouth of the Palnup River. And there's only 3 trees. There's only 3 trees. But I've ripped bits off them and cloned them, and I've now got something like 30,000 of them growing throughout Western Australia. That's what cloning does. You can take a specific genetic variation and turn it into something that's of value. And so we'll play on that one. This is a bit of a brag. That's an island which is famous for its muttonbird rookeries, and there's the rookery there. Here is the island before we started oil drilling. There's the oil drill in place, and there is the island after we finished oil drilling. There's the rookery completely untouched. In other words, the management of development can lead to conservation. My best example of that's a place called Barrow Island, which is a very big chunk of land, desert landscape on the West Australian coast. It's about 100 square miles, and it's about 60 miles off Karratha, and it has had an oil field on it for the last 50 years. And I've had the management of that oil field for the last 50 years. It has 14 different species of mammal, 8 of which don't occur anywhere else. They're extinct. They used to occur everywhere else. They're extinct everywhere else. It has 119 bird species. It has 57 reptile species, 1 frog species, 1,500 insect or invertebrate species. And in 50 years operation, producing 320 million barrels of oil and employing over 100,000 workforce in that time, we have not lost 1 species of animal or plant on the island. We have no weeds introduced successfully, and every ecosystem is intact. Why is that? Because I'm a dictator? Yeah, it's good to be the king. Being the king of the island means if anyone does the wrong thing, I can run them off. Now, that's always not possible, but the point is, if you want to save a species, you have to save the habitat in which it lives. And if you want to save a habitat, you've got to save the processes that make that habitat possible. Now, I'll come a bit later on. I want you to remember those three words: species, habitat and process, because I'm going to come back to that a bit later on. Anyway, that's one oil field that I did reasonably well. These are a couple of other. This is a pipeline that runs for nearly 1,200 miles from Moomba to Sydney and then up to Newcastle and down to Canberra. This is out in the worst possible desert you could imagine, and that is the rehabilitation over a 4-year period. These are not fake photographs. I can't be bothered. I can even do it underwater. But underwater is dead easy. You don't have to do anything. You just go away and let the water take its place. That's 4 years' growth of coral on a drill hole. The drill hole is there, and the coral is there below. Oil spills. Everyone complains about oil spills, but oil is the stuff that you actually put in the ground to feed your plants. Sugar is a hydrocarbon. Petrol is a hydrocarbon. Oil is a hydrocarbon. The sap of plants are hydrocarbon. It's all the same chemical product. It's a question of harnessing it. And this is the cover crop that I grew on this material. And having grown the cover crop and tested it for heavy metal, and found there was no significant heavy metal in there, it was pure oil, crude oil, the next crop was market garden. A market gardener came in and turned this place into a market garden. So it works. Again, just giving you an idea of how effective we are. There's an oil field in the desert up the top there, and you can see there the waste pits and the campsite, the drill site and so on. And here it is 4 years later. And the two cross lines are the seismic tracks. And because we've disturbed that desert soil with roads and tracks, the vegetation has developed along those tracks. That's the edge of the dune. That's not a track, that's the edge of the dune there. So I learn from nature. I don't fight with nature. I don't compete with it. Nature teaches me what I can do. And the people who taught me were the indigenous people of this country. As a young man, I grew up with them before I came to know them, and they taught me that everything in the world has a place and a purpose, and your job as a human is to understand that place and the purpose, because unless you can, you're not human. Something more to your heart, perhaps. This is a bauxite mine where we use the wing plough, and that's, again, 4 years rehabilitation on the same site. And here's a road that was built by some very enthusiastic engineers who got fired because you do not build roads down slopes like that. I think all of you know that. Erosion's a bit lethal. And here is the rehabilitation after 2 years. There's the tree. See, it's the same tree. But engineers are the biggest enemy that I have. Engineers do not believe that water flows downhill. They don't. They design things to flow water uphill. And all of my work is based on the simple physical factor that water flows downhill. Because when I talk about the environment, I'm not talking about plants and animals. They're only part of the environment. That is the biological part of the environment. I'm also talking about rocks and water and air. That is the physical environment. And I'm also talking about people and farms and cities and jobs. That's the social environment. And put those three things together and you have the environment we live in. It's the total surround of us. There's not just one little bit. So unplait the armpits, please, and get on with the job. This is a bit of a bigger area. This combines some nasties, salt, hoons, fishermen, blokes with motorbikes, blokes with four-wheel drives who just love running. This is a salt mine, sand mine, mineral sands mine in New South Wales, and there it is 4 years later. These are where the hoons have beaten me. but the strip is now intact. You've got to have some good anti-hoon fences. This is the one that upsets most people who say, well, you know, and so that is my pride and joy. That is a uranium mine. And when you say uranium, people go, ooh, that'll kill you. That stuff, nasty stuff. But there's the mine. And what we did here, this is at Jabiluka, or Niminak in the Northern Territory, we took all of the ore out and stockpiled it. And then we did complete rehabilitation on the site within 12 months. We took the ore out and stockpiled it. And then for the next 12 years, we've been treating that ore and refining it to get yellow cake. But the point is, instead of having a running saw of a mine for 12, 15 years, we took it all in one hit and did it. It's another alternate tool that I use quite a lot. Sand mining can be pretty massive. Not much of it around here, although nature does a bit. You see it's using a dredge, and this is the rehabilitation back to pastoral and bushland here. Most of my restoration is to bushland, I have to admit. This is the worst case, red mud, toxic red mud, very heavily loaded with heavy metals and toxic, and these are plants that will take up those toxins. The soil sampling down there breaks this away. Salt and other heavy metals are the problem. And perhaps the ultimate is the city. This is a city of town, 5,000 people, a place called Hearson Village, and it housed 5,000 people. They had a swimming pool, they had ovals, they had a shopping centre, they had a police station, they had everything that was necessary for 5,000 people, and there it is 1 year later. Because the local government was not interested in taking it over. Today they're begging for accommodation. That's at Karratha, and it costs around about $1,200 a night for a bed with no breakfast. So forget farming, go and flog a few beds off. Okay. Another one of my tools is in the drier country, and I include this Wheatbelt area as the drier country, is wind erosion. Water erosion is not quite so important, although it is important, as you know, but wind erosion is quite lethal. And so this type of ploughing, called figure 8 ploughing for obvious reasons, is on a pipeline. And this is a pipeline built from Dampier to Perth, or down to Bunbury, and you see we've left significant trees on the pipeline and gone around them. The pipeline itself is laid here, and we've got room over here for a second one. This is the access track for servicing the pipeline, and this area is all now just been ploughed for regeneration. Unfortunately, I don't have a photograph. I never get back to see these jobs when they're successful. The only time I get back is if they fail, and I don't go back to many jobs. That's a brag, but it's true. This is a technique called equalization. When you have an area, say just simply for example, a small area the size of this room, and you've mined it, you've made a gravel pit or whatever, and you want to rehabilitate it, but it's been open for the last 15 years while I've been pulling the gravel out. Now, obviously I don't do something the size of this room, it's too small, but just take this for an example. So what I do is I dump some fill in it, and then I level it off, and if there's any topsoil around I'll use it, and then I take topsoil from the surrounding areas and plant them back in. Same as a bald bloke can get a few plant on his scalp, same sort of thing. And this is called equalising. And then once that's done, I rip across it on the contour, and it works extremely well. It's a useful tool. Cover crops are something we use fairly extensively. This is a sand mine in Bowral, place in New South Wales. And the people there are very toey about their farming country. There's a bit of bushland over there, Sandridge, and this is all sand mine country. Now that has been, these are the access roads into the mining pit. That is the first part of the restoration. That's carrying a cover crop. This is still being levelled, soil tested and checked. There's a lot of levelling to do. These little stockpiles are going to be taken away. There's a lot of little works to do there, but in the end of 3 years, that whole area will be restored to farmland, this part, and this part here will be restored to bushland, because that is the requirement of the government of the day. Training is critical. You cannot do it. You cannot do it without training people. I think Julian mentioned research. You can't say, go and get some research. You've got to train people to research. You've got to train people to think positively about what they're doing. This is one of my research areas. You can see it's pretty grotty looking, isn't it? You can see there's the country what it should look like, and look at this. Ugh, that's not the same. So I take my students out and I say, okay, write me a 10-word thesis on why this is different. Why is it different? No, I'm not going to tell you. You tell me. Because if you can't tell me, get out, go away, go and do another job, go and sell fish and chips or something like that. But you can't work for me if you can't see something as simple as that. And I must say, over the probably 5,000 people I've trained on this site, I guess 4,000 have passed. 1,000 have gone and sold fish and chips. This is one of your local icons, Yorkakine Rock, and people farm up to the edge of it. The rock itself can't be farmed, no matter how good the farmer you are, you can't get your plough into that. And you'll notice, I don't know how much this has changed. This is a very old photo because I took this back when I first began my concept of connective corridors. And here you see how the roads act as corridors to these, joining up these patches of bushland. And so birds are okay, some reptiles are okay, but vermin get the most advantage. That's our biggest problem. That is why the Gondwana, well, not why, that is how Gondwana is working at the moment. The Gondwana Land Project in the south of the state is starting over near Eucla and is working through on bushland blocks, is purchasing derelict farms, and they are derelict. They've run out, they've tried tree farming and they've gone broke and they've walked away, and salt-ridden, and they're joining up corridors of replanted vegetation. Now we're not just replanting trees, we're replanting vegetation. You plant trees, but you also plant cover crops, and you plant ground cover, and you plant as many species as you can. The natural biota of that bit of bush around Yorkakine Rock was logged by a woman called Barbara York. I went to school with Barbara. I suppose some of you here might have too. But she was a Northern High School girl. Barbara York Main is one of the prestigious world scientists produced by our West Australian Wheatbelt. And she wrote a book called From Wadjal to Tor, in which she wrote a year of the animals and plants that lived in those remnant patches of bush. And I've been back to her work areas and there's nothing there now. They're gone. And that's why I say you can't bring it back. You can bring some of it back. I'll talk a bit more about that. Lastly, I'll mention vermin. Oh, we'll come back. Oh, I'll get it in a minute. Where do we go to the front? No, I want the last picture. Last one. Keep going. One after that. That's the one. Vermin is an ongoing problem in every farm, everywhere. And by vermin, I include weeds. You all know about weeds. You all know about rabbits. You all know about foxes and cats. And I know about your shooting programs. I know about your poisoning programs. I know about a lot of the things you do. But sometimes, if you're going to start restoring bushland in the Wheatbelt, you're going to have to do very precise trapping. Now, this is what the government uses. I'm sorry, it's not very good. but I use it as an example of what not to do. Underneath that is a poison bait, pindone, and I said to them, "What the hell are you doing?" They said, we're poisoning foxes. And I said, "But everything else is going to eat the baits." "Oh no, there's a little V there that the foxes can't get, the foxes can reach through, but oh, come on." What we do is we take, I want a simple answer, it's quite easy. 5-gallon plastic drum with the lid on it. Put the lid on and you cut holes in the lid about that size, about rat size. And on each side you put a wooden ladder. Not out like that, but almost straight up. Now rats, mice will climb that. And then inside you half fill the thing with dirt, and inside you put your pindone baits. So pigeons and doves and parrots and all of those things can't reach the baits. Bandicoots and things like that can't climb, so they can't reach the baits. So the only thing that reach the baits are your target species. Baiting requires you to focus on trap systems or poisoning systems that do not damage non-target species. You can wipe out, this particular one, they wiped out the species they were trying to save. It's on an island and they wiped it out because they were able to get at the bait before the foxes. I went over the 22 and shot 3 foxes, and that was the whole population of the island. But, you know, that was too simple, much too simple. All right, I've told you a little bit about my sort of work, but just to let you know that I've gone a wee bit more than that. For 20 years I was the chairman of the Parks and Wildlife Commission in the Northern Territory. And I brought these principles that I've spoken about. This principle of, if you want to protect a species, put it in the zoo, that's one way. It'll never work. Put it in a park, but if you're going to have a park, then you've got to create an island. And I've done that in a number of places in Australia. I've done it in Scotia, for example, in South Australia, New South Wales border. I've done it in Western Australia, I've done it in the Northern Territory, and we link the zoos and wildlife parks with the reserved areas. Now what the reserve area consists of is taking an area, the first thing you do is remove all artificial water. No dams, no windmills, natural soaks stay there, natural creeks stay there. Then you start running your fence lines out. And you run your fence line out along one edge, and it's not cheap. It's 8 foot high, it's electrified. And it costs $170,000 a kilometre minimally. It's buried into the ground. It's a fence, like, it's not the mother of all fences. I can go a lot more expensive and more deadly than that. Then you run a second fence, but not so big, parallel to it, but about a kilometre wide. Then you take a pack of Basenji dogs and you go through there with your shotgun and you shoot all the vermin that the dogs don't destroy. And I use Basenjis because they go down rabbit burrows. They can get down a rabbit burrow, and if they can't get down, they'll dig it out. They'll stay there until they get it. And they don't yap and make a lot of noise, they howl a bit. Then you put another fence down here and you do the same thing again. But around the fire break, you run a drag, and if you find a single vermin track, you do the whole process again. And you work on that until you've eradicated all the vermin in those areas. You don't take out the roos. The dogs will chase the roos, but you can call them off. That's why I use Basenjis. They're good trained dogs. And you can do any dogs, I suppose. Sheepdogs will probably do it, but they don't go down burrows. Then you keep moving across and you pull that fence out and you move it over here and you start leapfrogging the fence across and you work the whole area till you get your far boundary. And then for 2 years you just leave it like it is and allow the native plants that are left in there to come back. You don't plough, you don't cultivate. All you run are your fire breaks and you check them each day for vermin tracks. And then at the end of 2 years you cooperate with one of the zoos or one of the wildlife parks, and you get a species like bandicoots or hairy-nosed wombats or Tama wallabies or whatever, and they go into that secure island area. And we've now got some 30 of those. This year we're spending $60 million on translocating animals from Barrow Island into the area, these safe areas. Each animal is tagged, microchipped, and is in a stud book. And so that after 3 years we go back and we start trapping, and we find out how successful they are, and we then take some animals from this safe location, exchange with animals in that location. And so we don't get any bottlenecks, any biological bottlenecks of too small a population breeding and giving us problems. Barrow Island's a very small population to start with, a very small bottleneck to start with. For example, the kangaroo on Barrow Island is about that high, and when you drive around the island, you've got to stop your car because the kangaroo lies on the road and it just looks at you. They're completely unafraid of people, and they, after 8,000 years of isolation, where they've not been hunted or affected by humans in any way at all, after 8,000 years, they have developed into a micro race, a smaller race of animals. And they have a sickle cell anemia, if you like to call it that, which makes them totally lazy. They don't drink water, and they survive on eating dry spinifex. So evolution will take place in these patches if you want to prepare them. I'll open it up to you now. I did say I'd leave time for questions, and I think I've left enough time, have I? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you're going to ask, but I'm going to ask too. So if you have any questions, now's your chance. Yes, sir.
Chevron have just announced that they want to use up more of Barrow Island's land space. Given that it's an A-class reserve, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, since I'm the author of deciding what space they can use, I can only say I've agreed with it because I've looked at the problem, and the issue is simply there is disturbed areas on the land used by the oil field. And what I want to do is transfer some of those areas to Gorgon, which is a separate title, but it's not going to disturb any more of the island. So this is media reporting as opposed to fact. The point is there are 3 entities on Barrow Island. There is WA Oil, which produces what used to be called Whoppet, and it produces oil. There's the Parks and Wildlife, because it's a conservation reserve, a nature reserve, a Class A reserve, and there's Gorgon. Now Gorgon has 300 hectares of the island, but Whoppet has the whole 100 square mile. So where Whoppet has a piece of land which is no longer in use but is not yet rehabilitated, because we let it settle because we're testing for contaminated soil. And just so I get this clear to all of you, contaminated soil on Barrow is a direct result of government intervention in our operations. When we started, we did not take asbestos on the island. The government ruled that we would use asbestos as a weighting in our mud drilling program. As a result, we have asbestos contaminated soil on the island. But the government takes no responsibility because they say, oh, it's another government, it has nothing to do with us. I think you all know that issue. My colleagues at Coolin, when I went to work with them, they had a conditional purchase farm. And when I put out my farm management plan, Bill said, can't do that. He said, you've got to clear all the vegetation first. I think you might remember, some of you are old enough to remember when that was happening. And yeah, government is not always the brightest and the best. Bite your tongue, Harry. Anybody else?
Any more questions?
Harry, can I ask a question? Waste management is something that Shire councils are all afraid of, to handle, to tackle. We're all afraid of waste management. What do we do with it?
I think the reason is that we don't have the wider vision and see the opportunity. The opportunity in waste management for a Montesano type system in Perth is real. Montesano type system takes all the wastes and separates the metals from the glass, from the toxics, and produces gas, methane gas, produces fertiliser, produces oil by the tyres, has a incinerator which is a high temperature incinerator that reduces stuff to component parts, so the toxics are burned off and collected in the incinerator and dropped out as chemicals and kept as on-sold as chemicals, and you end up with cinder blocks. Now you need a population of 2 million people, wastes, to set one of those running properly. But you can do modifications of it quite simply here. And already a number of the areas in Perth are being capped with plastic caps to take the methane gas off and being used. The old rubbish tips are buried, and they're pumping water into them to flush the gas out, and then allowing the water, and then testing the water, and then passing that water back through other bores into groundwater discharge. So water, but the tips now have got their scavengers on them who have a whole lot of recycled material, as you probably know. But the real fear is the transport, the chance of toxins coming in, and the things that aren't toxins today being toxins tomorrow. Like asbestos. When you were a young man, all the brake linings on your car were asbestos. So all the streets in Northam are loaded with asbestos. Not because of any other reason except that's historic. The soil tests show it. But no one talks about that. We talk about, oh, we broke a building down with asbestos, it's a terrible thing. So all these people come up and make money out of it. But waste is a product, and waste management is a product that I believe local government should look at much more closely. And I'm not trying to dump the problem. I'm trying to say there is an opportunity to handle waste products. Mindari took, years ago I advised Mindari on that, because waste management is one of my big bad issues. And I took on to Mindari and said, you've got this huge quarry up here, limestone quarry, which is derelict land. What are you going to do with it? Oh, I don't know. I said, well, why don't you turn to a waste disposal transfer assembly area so you can salvage and utilise, which they did. It's now completed, it's backfilled and it's built over. But that netted them, I don't know, $40 or $50 million in rentals. Time was alive. So I didn't get any of it, unfortunately. I wish I would have liked to have done it for anyway. Anybody else? Sir?
You showed a slide a while ago of the red mud.
Yep.
Being revegetated.
Yep.
You're saying it's going to turn into a market garden.
Yep.
What happens to those heavy metals you were talking about? Do they eventually dissipate? Do they stay there? Or what's the story with that?
No, you use vegetation to take up the heavy metals. The ordinary bulrush, the cumbungy, thing that grows on all your freshwater soaks in the gutters and things, that is a great absorber of heavy metals. And in the process of absorbing, it reduces them to a non-toxic level. Some minerals, like mercury, bioaccumulate. And the classic example of that is Union Carbide had a battery factory in Japan, a little river called Minamoto. And they discovered that the fishermen were all going down with what they call laughing disease, Minamoto disease. And the hospitals discovered that they were overloaded with mercury. And so the scientists then went to work belatedly, not ahead of the game, but after the game. And they found that the discharge of the factory was within the required limits of the government, which is 1 part per billion mercury. You got that? 1 part per billion. That's the first step between here and Perth. That's sort of. But when it got out into the ocean, the plankton ate it. and they bioaccumulate it. They couldn't digest it. And so they brought it into their bodies to 1 part in 10 million. And then when the little shrimps ate the plankton, they brought it in their bodies to 1 part in a million. And when the little fish ate the shrimps, they brought it in their bodies to 1 part in 10,000. And when the big fish ate them, they brought it in their bodies to 1 part in 1,000. And when the fishermen ate them, they were dead. Bioaccumulation. That's why heavy metals are so dangerous to us. Now, some heavy metals are not a problem. Some heavy metals like iron, barium, things like that. They give people barium, they give people iron tablets, they give people calcium tablets. And we need to go a whole lot more into the science of understanding how these things mobilise. You're probably aware that even gold mobilises. I think most of you would have seen last night's news or today's paper that in the goldfields they've discovered that the trees taking up the nutrients have also taken up gold. And they've got gold in their leaves, and gold in their wood, and gold in their trunks. And in today's paper, there was a story that suggested this might be April Fool's joke because those trees have been growing there for the last 10,000 years, and all those leaves dropping on the ground would have gold-plated the ground by now. Of course, the writer didn't realise that the gold that is like that is soluble and will be absorbed again and again and again. It's not just once. It keeps being recycled over. But what we did in Kosciuszko, for example, we took all the human waste from Thredbo and the villages up there and ran them through a pond, or a series of ponds about the size of this hall, and they were connected by Kumbunji. And then we harvested the Kumbunji and spread it out on the road during the snow season. So we harvested and got but the water that came out in the Krakenbach River was completely clear of toxins. So, but there's no, I know I make it sound simple, but there's no simple answer. The answer I've got on Barrow Island might not apply to where you are. The answer you got here might not apply in the southwest or in the Pilbara or in the Kimberley or wherever else. You need to know what are the processes that drive the habitats that support the species in your country. And in your case, you know what they are. If you want to grow wheat or any of those crops, it's water and fertiliser and sunlight. And if you want to grow sheep, it's water and fertiliser and sunlight and grass and fencing. But if you can keep that up, you're going to keep going. But if you want to put in native animals, then you've got to know a little bit more about what they rely on. Like most of the small wallabies, bandicoots and things rely on fungi. And the fungi are gone because of our fertiliser application. The fungi are no longer there. So if you're going to bring back numbats and things like that to your area, you're going to need to have fungi growing there that will support the termites that allow the numbats to feed. It's not as simple as feeding your sheep or feeding your cattle or feeding your grass. It's a lot more complex. Anybody else? Oh, sorry, you're the man in charge.
You're going well, Harry.
I don't want to run over time.
No, you're right.
No?
No more questions?
Yes, one more there.
Yeah, you're talking a lot about the opportunities that you actually, challenges that come up, and as in our own professions, we see lots of challenges within the landscape that are actually seem to be quite difficult to solve unless you did something radically different. If you could impart, say, 1 or 2 skills that we could take away and actually learn and develop on how to actually change or modify people's thinking so they can actually visualise those opportunities, what would they be?
As I think I said, every area is different, but as general skills, and forgive me if I sound simplistic, water flows downhill. But it doesn't have to flow downhill fast. So by using contour banking, you can help control salt, but you can also load the water content of your area longer than it does if you run it into a creek and let it run away. Now, I know that sounds terribly simplistic, but it's amazingly underused in the Wheatbelt. It's amazingly underused. The second thing I'd say is look to your land and which are the areas which are the derelict areas, the fence lines, the corners of paddocks where you bring your cultivation around but the corner's not touched. And use that to start your vegetation planting, to give you shade, to draw down salt, and to act as the markers for your vegetation planting. Put your planting on your fence lines, not out in the middle of the paddocks. The stock will come to them. If necessary, fence them. And that's the third thing, is try and protect them. I know they're all simplistic things, but they're functional things. And a lot of people don't think about it. They're thinking about how we're going to get this crop in, have I got time? And with this year, with the rainfall like it's been, my property's down at Bustleton, and I had 200 mils last weekend, where my secretary was getting married on the property, and was an open air wedding. She wasn't very happy with me. She blames me for the weather. I hope that helps. I'm sorry, but I tried to show you some of the things I've done. On a wider scope, and this applies to the people from Tamman and that area where I know you've got a very strong natural resource management program running, look to the resources and the processes that have left those resources. Can you replicate them? Can you manage to replicate them? And if you can replicate them, then what can you bring back? There are not many big trees left out there, so any birds that nest in hollows are going to be in trouble. So can you build artificial nesting hollows, for example? I'm talking now of pragmatic things that we do in other places. Can you create artificial wetlands from your polluted or sewage waters or grey waters? Can you use artificial wetlands or artificial damp lands even, so that on your farm you have your water goes out and waters your garden instead of just running out in the paddock? I know it sounds very, very simplistic, but it's very, very real too. I think I might stop there.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And just ask you, thank you very much for a very entertaining talk.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.